Gillian is currently the Vice Chancellor for Research at the City University of New York at CUNY. She received her doctorate in the biological sciences from the University of Wolverhampton in England. She came to the United States to do postdoc work at Rockefeller with Nobel laureate Christian de Devouve, and her research is focused on the biogenesis of organelles and the regulation of lipid metabolism. She's been funded for 20 years by the NIH, the NSF, and the American Heart Association. I think you're set to go, or are you still working? Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for accommodating the switch. I have to get back to New York. Let me start by really thanking the board for inviting me to speak today. I've loved the day so far, especially intermixing talking about women in science and talking about the actual science. It's definitely the most enjoyable day of my week this week. As Vice Chancellor for Research at CUNY, and for those of you who are not familiar with CUNY, it's actually the largest urban public university in the country. We have 24 different colleges and schools across the 5 boroughs of New York. We have approximately 260,000 full-time students and about another 250,000 part-time and continuing ed students. So our student body is about 500,000. So that's a lot of minds to influence. And as I talk, and I've sort of prepared some remarks, and a lot of what I've said has sort of about women in science has been raised already by Alice and also by Eileen. So I'm going to try not to be too repetitive, but maybe bring up how through my career and getting to this position, how I've wound my career, and then what we're doing at CUNY to try and support women in science. So I'll try and do that in my allotted time. And I have to start off with a confession, actually, because when I started my career, first of all, there were not many structures for women in science at that time, but had there been, I was that young, stubborn scientist that didn't want to be known for being a woman in science, but wanted to be known for my science. So I don't think, quite honestly, I would have taken advantage of them, which would have been my loss. But they weren't. And I also wanted to say something about a point that I think Eileen raised, perhaps from one of the emails she received, about people saying that the women, the senior women that they encountered had not been good mentors to them. And I think I would have to say that was true in my early experience. And I think it stemmed from the fact, and this is not universal, I'm sure there were some fabulous women's mentors, but some of the ones I encountered, I think it was the fact that they were the one woman that had made it. And there wasn't room for any other women. So, they had to sort of protect their territory. They were the woman, they'd made it, they'd got to this position. And maybe they would have helped you if you were going to go somewhere else, but not necessarily mentored you there. I think there was a flavor of that, and I think that's gone. I think the women that I meet now, the senior women scientists, are really terrific and really do try to help mentor junior scientists. A little about my background, Rita just mentioned it briefly. I started off in England. I got my PhD from Wolverhampton, then Polytechnic, now university. And I went to Cambridge University for a brief period. I had a postdoc position there, and I was a tutor at Newhall College, which is an all-women's college. It's now called Murray Edwards College, but at that time it was Newhall College. And so I encountered many junior women scientists, and I did encounter some of that bias that we've been talking about. I have a good friend who's also from Cambridge, although I didn't know her then. Neither of us came from Ivy League backgrounds, and both of us encountered similar things. But I specifically was at a dinner at Newhall College. If any of you are familiar with Cambridge, you'll know that these are very pompous affairs. And a rather elderly gentleman next to me was sort of asking which college of Cambridge I was from, and I said, I'm not from Cambridge, I was Wolverhampton Polytechnic. And he said some version of, isn't it fabulous that people like you can come to places like this? And So yes, there was definitely some bias at Cambridge. I then came to the US to do a 2-year postdoc and never caught the plane home, so here I am. It was with Christian de Duve, the Nobel laureate, who was actually himself just one of the most fabulous people that I could possibly hope to meet. He was humble. He was sweet. He acted as a mentor. I remember he was at Rockefeller University, but he also had an institute in Belgium. And I was going to a conference in Amsterdam, and he invited me to come to his institute in Belgium and give a talk. And he personally, this Nobel laureate, came to greet me, a junior postdoc. He introduced me. He took me out to lunch afterwards, and that was the type of mentor he was. So I was very lucky to have someone like that in that stage of my career. I then went to my first faculty position was actually at the University of Florida. It was then that I realized that, the U.S. was not New York. There was other parts of the U.S. It was not not my favorite place to be. I'm sorry, I apologize if there's any Floridians in the room, but after 3 years, I hightailed it back to New York and spent 10 years actually at Mount Sinai School of Medicine, where I ran a research lab and also ran a large doctoral training program. And then in 2001, I moved to CUNY. I was recruited to oversee research at the system, first as university dean and then as vice chancellor for research. In fact, I was the first vice chancellor for research at CUNY. And I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear, as I've said, the CUNY system is spread across the 5 boroughs of New York. I try to reach as many colleges and outreach as I can. So my own research has definitely taken a dive, but now I spend my time trying to support other people's research. So that's a brief history of my career, and I would say that that I was very lucky that at certain points people like Christian de Duve and a few others stepped in to help mentor me, and had it not been for those people, my career could have turned out very, very differently. So it makes me realize that how important it is to support women, especially in all junior scientists, but women especially in science, for all the reasons we've heard already today. I think women have a harder time. And I have had friends in my life who've fallen out of science because they didn't have that right mentorship. I think the good news is that women have made remarkable gains. We've heard about some of them. I think statistics I have from the National Science Foundation are that nearly half of all doctorates in science and engineering are now received by women. There are still some areas, especially in the physical sciences, where they're not doing so well, but in general, women are entering science. Yet how do we still have the statistics that only 20% of full professors are women? And only 5%, I think, of full professors in engineering are women. These are approximate numbers, but it still raises the question that we have problems in keeping women in science. And as has already been mentioned today, the salary gap is still alive and well, maybe getting smaller, but it hasn't disappeared. And just like many other women have said today, and I've had experience in my career where I'm going along, I think I'm doing pretty well, I'm getting promoted, and things are great, and then suddenly I realize that the guy next door is earning 10% more than I am, and then suddenly you're not so happy, you're not so content, life has this big cloud over your head, and you have to ask what you can do about it. And I think in places that I've been and myself have been empowered by what happened at MIT to speak out and sort of say this is not okay. And again, I encourage all junior scientists or people entering science that, as has been said already today, I think if you don't speak up, these injustices continue. So you really do have to speak up, ask the questions of your colleagues. What's your salary? They don't have to tell you, but if they do, it may not make your day, but it may empower you to be really angry and to do something about it. I was going to talk a little bit about bias, but the studies have already been mentioned. So I'm going to just touch briefly on another topic, and that is the imposter complex. Many of you may have heard about this, but I've certainly had it. you get your, your undergraduate, you're doing well, you get your PhD, and this constant thought in the back of your head is, at some point they're going to find me out. I don't really deserve this. I don't really work this hard. How could I possibly have my PhD? How could I possibly be doing this? And you think it's just you, and and then you talk to your female friends, and I feel the same way. And I think this is so true of women scientists. And I think just to acknowledge that we can have that feeling, and I've spoken to some guys who also actually have admitted that they felt the same thing, but I think it's much more common in women. And I think it's good to have this group of women that you can talk to and boost each other's and say, of course you deserve it. Look at what you're doing. You're almost killing yourself, goddammit. So I think you have to acknowledge these things. I certainly have had this complex of you have to do it better, you have to do, a friend of mine quotes me from my running experience when I was in my, I guess, mid-30s. I decided to start running because I had this friend that would come and stay with me, and she'd go and run around the reservoir in Central Park. And I said, okay, one day I'm going to go out and run with you. And I couldn't get round that 1.5 mile loop without stopping. So I went home and thought, this is not going to happen. And the next time she came and stayed with me, I could run 6 times around the loop. And I said, guess what? I'm going to run the marathon next year. And actually I did. So, I think, I'm not saying everybody has to have that drive, but I think to have drive like that, women tend to feel like, I have to do it bigger, better, and prove myself. And hopefully those days will stop. But I still think there is some of that women feel that they have to do more, better, higher to be seen as equal. We've talked about this leaky pipeline, and by that we mean that women are starting to go into the sciences. We're trying to do a lot to mentor women to go into the sciences. But they tend to drop out at each stage of the process more than men, so that there's this disproportionate level of full professors and heads of departments that are male rather than female. And I think some of the reasons for that are very obvious. I mean, Eileen mentioned a lot of them, but I think the family issues are really critical. I mean, in my field, in the biosciences, by the time you've got your undergraduate, you've got your PhD. In my cases, I did 2 postdocs, one in England and one in the US. And by that time, most women are in their early to mid-30s, which is prime childbearing age, just at the point you're about to enter a 5 to 7 year tenure clock. And you're faced with the question of, if I want to have a child, do I do it now before I start this? Do I try and do it in between, or do I wait until I've got tenure? I joke, I think I said it to Carla on the phone, there is a reason that I'm at this age and this stage in my career, and I have a 12-year-old son, who I love and adore. But, I'm not necessarily unusual among my friends. I have many friends who've had their child or children in their 40s. So some people say you have to make accommodations. Some people would call them sacrifices. The question is, can you have it all? I think you can. You can't have it all at one time. You have to make some compromises and accommodations to have that full life. I do have friends who've had children before they started their tenure clock, and I have friends who've had children throughout. But I think what you need is a lot of support. And the issue of having partners who can help you raise your children is very important. I think there's some great men around who really do that, but still there is this tendency for it to be seen as the woman's job. If there's problems at the nursery or the daycare, it's usually the mother they call, even if they've got the father's phone number on the phone. And there's also this feeling that if a woman takes care of these things, it's sort of expected. It's not seen as anything special. If a man takes care of these things, he's seen as a superhero. And I quote a meeting that I was in that rings out in my head very clearly at a prior institution I was at, when we were sitting in a meeting about 4 o'clock or so around a table. I think we were doing admissions to the graduate program, and we were a mixed group. And one of the guys stood up and he said, "I'm really sorry. I have to leave now. I'm on childcare duty and I have to go and pick up my son from daycare. And there was just this collective, oh, what a great guy around the table, you know. He does all this and he cares about his family too. And I know if that had been me, it would have been more, you know, she doesn't really take this seriously. She's more interested in her family. And that's just, those biases actually come from women and men. You know, it's not just the men who have that feeling. If a woman's doing it, she's putting her family first. If a man's doing it, he's just being a superhero. So I think we have to look inwards to ourselves as well and try and help, you know, support women who are trying to, as we say, do it all. So at CUNY, I tried to put together programs that do support women at all stages of their career. And I'll tell you about a few of them. We sponsor STEM programming. We partner with the Department of Education on the New York City Science and Engineering Fair that takes high school students. They partner with sometimes faculty at universities, sometimes with their teachers in the school. They enter the fair. There's 2 rounds, and then the winning students go to the Intel competition, and then, you know, some of the faculty at CUNY try to hang on to some of those students and mentor them throughout their research career. We also have many undergraduate research programs. We started one centrally, a CUNY summer undergraduate research program, where we take some of our about 20 or so students each summer and give them a 10-week research experience, partnering them with some of our top faculty and bringing them together once a week for a talk, but not always a science talk. Sometimes it's what some of the scientists come in and talk about their own career and how they got to where they are, different types of career opportunities for them. Sometimes we take them on a tour of the labs at the back of the Museum of Natural History and really try to give them a research experience. And we make sure, I mean, for those of you who are familiar with CUNY, we are a minority serving institution on average, although not all of our colleges are. We really try to save some of the slots for our minority students, make sure that we have equal gender mix in that group. And we also actually have a couple of slots for our community college students who really want to transfer to a senior college and have a research experience, so that as they come to their senior college, that they've already started to have some research. A few years ago now, I think 2009 or 2010, we initiated our Women in Science program, specifically Women in Science program. And with that, we have an ongoing series of forums for women at all stages in their careers. Sometimes we bring in high school students from the outside schools, but also for our undergraduates and for our postdocs and for our junior scientists. And we have different topics. We also make it open to other institutions in the city. One of the annual workshops is we entitle Inspiring Women Scientists. I think that's the one you came to, Carla. We do that in collaboration with the Women's Feminist Press, which is housed at the CUNY Graduate School. And again, we have different topics. For our workshops, one of the most interesting topics I think we had, or the one that gained the most interest, was one called In Negotiating a Successful Academic Career. And it was really focused on negotiating skills. Because for sure, on average, women do not negotiate as well as men. I think, again, there are many reasons for that. I think if a man's negotiating, he's seen as assertive, and if a woman's negotiating hard, she's seen as difficult. So there are perceptions there, but we focused it around the book. If any of you haven't read it, there's a book called Women Don't Ask by Linda Babcock. It's a very good book. It highlights some of these issues. And, you know, I certainly see it in myself. I think I'm pretty good at negotiating for other people. But when it comes to negotiating for myself, you know, it doesn't feel good necessarily. So I think people have to be trained into how to do that. And I know from sitting on the other side of the table when I'm negotiating with people that we're trying to recruit to CUNY, some men can be very good at this, and they can quite disarm you, and you make an offer of this is the salary, this is the startup, and they just look at you and say, what, are you crazy? You think I can do this for this? You know, and almost put you on the defensive, where a woman is much more likely to say, oh, I'm sure that'll be fine, you know? And I mean, there's a lot of variations between those two, but in general, there is definitely a difference between women negotiating, and I think to learn how to do that in a way that is that helps you feel assertive, but not, like I say, be difficult and get this other reputation that, you know, she's the bitch, you know, that we don't want to hire anymore. It's difficult, and it's a fine balance it's a fine line to balance, and I think we have to be careful to do that. And I think there are different things that women can negotiate. Things like, can we have a break in the tenure clock? You know, do you have resources for childcare? Is there a maternity room I can go and nurse my child at lunchtime? In addition to salary and startup and space, these other issues that women might not want to raise, but I think they're perfectly valid in raising them. And maybe if the institution has a point blank no to all of those, it may not be the institution that she wants to go to. There's one other program that we're just about to start. I know, I forget who mentioned it, but people were talking about maybe it was Alice was talking about nominating women for awards. And we have not been so good at that in general at CUNY. It has not been, you know, we're not a tier 1 research university. We're aspiring to that, and we're doing a lot to get there. But it has not been the practice, I think, as much as at some institutions. So I recently partnered with one of our faculty member who does a lot in gender equity studies. And we got a small grant from the Sloan Foundation to really have a mentoring program at the university where we're reaching out, and we're doing it as a research project where we've taken 4 departments at 3 of our different colleges. I think it's biology, chemistry, physics, and psychology. And we're working with the chairs of each of those departments, and through this grant we're giving them a small amount of money, and each of the chairs have to nominate somebody in their department who's going to be the person who's going to learn about nominating. And they're committed to identifying one faculty, we're hoping mostly women, but we can't actually say that, for an award. And it can be a junior award, it can be a more senior award, it can be an award related to one of the agencies that have awards. So we have hired, again on this funding, a postdoc who's really, you know, scouring through all the possible awards, and we're really making it into a project to get our junior faculty and senior faculty, as appropriate, nominated for more awards. And as I said, given that it's myself and this other faculty member running this, we're going to be sure to make sure that women are well represented in those faculty that are nominated. I mean, my hope is for the future that we can continue both to improve the pipeline and keep people in the pipeline, and that women will be better represented in all the fields. I mentioned earlier that the proportion of science degrees granting to women has increased, but there is this disparity in the number of women receiving PhDs and those getting junior faculty positions. So we're aspiring to change that, but also in this era of entrepreneurship, we're trying to get more women to become more entrepreneurial as they go on with their science. Currently, there's a gap, again, a gender gap in that, beginning with disclosure. There's a gap between men and women at each stage of technology transfer, which also falls under my hat at the university. So then, while the number of women applying for patents is on the rise, they only hold approximately 10% of the patents in this country. Male academics are much more likely to try a startup company and try to exploit their inventions. To that end, at CUNY we recently got an NSF award for to run one of the I-Core nodes. So we currently run the New York Regional Innovation Node. If you're not familiar with this program, it's really to help teams of researchers transition their emerging technology concept into new products. I'm PI of this initiative. I will note that I think ours is the only I-Core program that has a woman PI. So, and we plan actually to run, as part of our Women in Science series, entrepreneurial workshops for women as part of this as well, to really try and get more of our women to be entrepreneurial and start jobs, and then they can apply, employ more women scientists. A lot of what we've done at the university has been done under what we've called the Decade of Science at CUNY, which was a random decade, I think 2005 to 2015. It's real. We are building a lot of new science buildings at the moment, and the sort of pinnacle of this is a new science building, an advanced science research center that we will be opening next year. This is a 200,000 square foot center that is really, the focus is interdisciplinary research, and we have 5 areas of science that we'll be supporting in this building. They are nanoscience, photonics, structural biology, neuroscience, and environmental science. So these are 5 areas of science that wouldn't always naturally fit in your head as areas that come together. But if you think long term and the way that science is now so interdisciplinary, it really is impossible to be, as I was when I started, a biologist in a lab doing my own little research on this little area and using this set of techniques. I think, and science will go ever more so interdisciplinary, and it's more important to, you can't do it all yourself, but to collaborate with people from the other areas. So the idea of this center is really to provide the very high-end core resources that faculty need for their research. We have a state-of-the-art nanofabrication center in the clean room in the building. We're putting fMRI, we're putting NMR, we're putting very high-end imaging, so that faculty from across CUNY will be able to come and use these core facilities. But we're also hiring a group of faculty, a sort of leader in each of those 5 fields, and then additional faculty under them. And with the idea that people that we're looking for are people that will not only bring people together in their area of research, but also will also link up with these other areas. So think of photonics and neuroscience and how there are some connections there, or nanoscience and environmental sciences, and really extend each area of science across those disciplines. When the center opens, we've also included, and I'm getting around to why I think this is really important for us, a space on the first floor, which we call the Science Education and Discovery Center. And it's an area where we're going to really have sort of a hands-on touch feel type experience. And we're planning to bring in programming so that we bring in, could be a class of middle school students, it could be a class of high school students, or undergraduates, or even adult education people who want to learn more about the science, so that they can get a hands-on feeling of the science and then have a lecture or a seminar from one of our top scientists about the science. We work closely, as I said, with the high schools, so we're already reaching out now and talking to some of the high school leaders about partnering with us on this programming. Because in addition to thinking it important to have more women in science, I also think it's important to educate the general public. One of my pet themes is the fact that I think the number now is over 50% of the population of this country do not believe in evolution. I think there is a movement in this country away from vaccination, one of the biggest medical breakthroughs we ever had. So I think if we can just help to educate the population at large. We run a program that I started a couple of years ago for all of our undergraduates, called the CUNY Nobel Science Challenge. So when the Nobel Prizes are announced each year, we throw out a challenge to our undergraduates to write an essay about the science behind the prize that year, and to write it in a way that makes the science accessible to the layperson, and what has its impact been on humanity. And we get undergraduates from all different disciplines, not just the scientists. We get music majors writing essays about the physics Nobel Prize, because we give nice prizes to the students who have the winning essays. So anything we can do to have people in general thinking about science and just understanding its impact. We talk to them about the fact that from the minute they wake up in the morning till the minute they go to bed, they're taking part in things that have been developed because of science. Whether it's the alarm clock that wakes them up, whether it's the GPS that navigates them to school, or so on and so forth. And we've had some fabulous winners in that. And I will say the women undergraduates tend to write the better essays, and so have been pretty successful in that program. I think I will end it there, and I'm very happy to answer any questions. So thank you again for inviting me. You know, that's a good question. We haven't yet. It's actually one of my favorite events of the year because the students, winners, we tell, what we do is we have 4 categories, physiology and medicine, physics, chemistry, and economics. And we have first, second, and third prizes in each of those, and our faculty, read that. And then we take the top essay from each one, and we send it to an external committee, and we ask them to pick the best overall essay, and we announce that at the event we have, and that student wins $3,000, a check. So for our students who are, often very, the most needy students, that's a big deal for them. That's in fact half the CUNY tuition, and it's a big event, and they bring their parents, and they love it. So it's a good idea. We should take it to the next level.
One's a question. The Florence Hasseltine. One's a point and one's a question. I'm very interested in your nominating people for an awards. And the Society for Women's Health Research, we run a project called the RAISE Project, where we have enumerated a lot of awards. And I'd like to talk to your people. I mean, I'm happy to download the data and send it to you. It's just raiseproject.org. And we have something like over 2,000 awards in there.
That's fabulous. Thank you.
So that you can screen through them, and we can tell you which ones have given awards to women and which ones haven't.
Terrific.
So
Thank you.
we've done that screening. It's a highly curated and time-consuming project.
Then we'll take advantage
Okay.
of it. Thank you.
And I'd like to take advantage of your person too. Believe me, this is 2 ways.
Absolutely.
But the point is we have a young woman here. She's going to be talking. We have to give her instructions and role-playing so she can take advantage of what we have accumulated. And you said you have some programs like that?
In
To
terms
help
of,
women negotiate?
yeah, well, we run, as part of our workshops, we do this. So
What about women coming into your place? You warn them in advance? They have to be aggressive?
it depends whether I'm negotiating with them once we've gone. Yeah, I mean, these are workshops that we run to encourage our women. And, even we ran this workshop, we invited postdocs, we invited senior doctoral students and junior faculty. And some of the junior faculty were saying, I wish I'd known this before I came here, So I think the point is to get to students young, so when they're doctoral students, even learning how to negotiate a postdoc position, simple questions like, is there going to be a project I can take away when I leave, and look for my first faculty position? Do you have a policy for authorship on papers? And things like that, I think, we do training in as well. So there's lots of things that junior scientists don't necessarily find intuitive, and unless people talk about these things, that they find out the hard way quite often. But I'd love to get to share our databases. That would be great.
And I want her trained.
Is she in New York?
No, I know. But even more, there's never enough.
Well, mentorship, right? It's really, really important that you hook people. We also have a mentoring program where I didn't mention, but where we put our junior faculty with a more senior faculty and try to give mentorship on all of these aspects as well.
So I was just wanting to comment on this negotiating skill and also fold that into this issue of whether one has the self-assurance or considers oneself maybe to be one down or an imposter. I think these things all rather come together. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, for women in particular, but also for people who are outside the mainstream, either in terms of whatever we consider to be privileges of understanding the middle, to have as much information as possible going into grad school, going into job negotiations, going into any circumstance that you are in. And I think one of the great advantages of organizations like this one, but also peer group organizations within women's groups, which are often denigrated, made fun of. It's the sewing. I remember I was part of a group at the University of Maryland, and they used to call us the sewing circle, and we called ourselves the mafia. So it's a matter which end of the lens you're looking at. But I think one of the issues also is to teach women to develop negotiating skills, women I've mentored over time, that don't necessarily deviate from one's sense of what is within your range. So rather than saying, you really expect me to work for that amount of money, or you expect me to do this with those kinds of resources, the other side of the coin is to say, I've done my research, I know what this job is worth,
Exactly.
and also I know what my worth is. So perhaps there's not a good match here. Something that really, in essence, levels the playing field.
You're absolutely right. I mean, that's what we talk to. I mean, I was using the arrogant male as an example of how you don't want to be really. But what we train the students, what we talk to them about, and the junior faculty, is to really do your homework before you go to the interview. So you should know more about the institution than they know about you when you get there, and then you're armed with that information. And then when they make an offer, you know whether it's in the right ballpark or whether you're being undersold. But thank you. Those are true things. Yeah, Alice.
Well, Sheryl Sandberg also says, just think of it when you're negotiating, rather than using the word I, think of we.
Mm-hmm. Right.
When you begin to think in that way,
Mm-hmm.
your negotiating becomes more natural, and
Right. Right.
you don't really have to be aggressive.
No, you're right. You're right. I think negotiating is one of those hard elements that nobody's really taught how to do it. And then suddenly, I mean, I know for myself, when I was very naive. When I was a postdoc at Rockefeller and I was looking for my first faculty position, I had to talk to other people. And luckily, there were a bunch of other postdocs that I could talk to. And I go, well, you know, what's the right thing to do? I mean, you know, and they really talked, you know, somebody was just ahead of me and they were writing up their list of requests, and I mimicked that. But if you're isolated and you don't have that environment, then I think it's very, very difficult. And I've seen some of the people come to CUNY completely clueless about what they need. And, you know, I talked to the provost at our colleges, and they say, well, she didn't ask for that. And I said, you know what? She doesn't know what she needs to ask for, but I'm telling you, she needs it. You know, the more people can learn before they go for interviews as to what the environment is, what they should rightly ask for and expect, the better they would be.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.